The chandeliers in the Reed Estate ballroom caught the light like frozen tears, refracting brilliance across 300 faces that had gathered to celebrate something that no longer existed. Gina Percy stood beneath one of those crystal fixtures, her champagne-colored gown catching the same light, making her look ethereal and untouchable, while inside she was fragmenting into pieces too small to ever reassemble. The orchestra played something classical and elegant, the kind of music that wealthy families chose for important occasions, and servers moved through the crowd with champagne that cost more than most people earned in a month. Nathan Reed, her husband, stood at the mahogany podium that had been erected specifically for speeches, his hand resting possessively on the shoulder of a woman Gina had never seen before. The woman glowed with that particular radiance that needed no explanation, her silk dress draped carefully over the unmistakable curve of life growing beneath it. Gina watched her husband's fingers curl against the fabric of the woman's sleeve, protective and proud, and felt something vital inside her chest simply stop beating. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight." Nathan's voice carried across the ballroom with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, who had never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. What began as a celebration of my marriage has become something more significant. Sometimes life demands we make choices that honor legacy over sentiment, duty over comfort. Gina's hands tightened around the stem of her champagne flute until her knuckles went white. She knew what was coming because she had lived through the preparation for this moment, had watched her husband grow distant over months, had felt him pulling away like a ship leaving harbor while she stood on the dock, waving at something already gone. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. Knowing didn't protect her from what happened next. 15 years ago, I married a woman I believed would give me everything I needed to continue the Reed name into the next generation. Nathan continued, and Gina felt every eye in the room turn toward her like weapons being loaded. But sometimes, what we need and what we want are separated by circumstances beyond anyone's control. My wife couldn't give me children, couldn't give me an heir, couldn't fulfill the most basic requirement of a Reed marriage. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that would consume everything. Gina stood frozen, while Nathan presented his humiliation as inevitable fact, as reasonable conclusion, as something she should have anticipated and accepted gracefully. Around her she heard the collective intake of breath, saw women's hands fly to their mouths, watched men exchange glances that said they understood even if they wouldn't have been quite so public about it. "This is Vanessa Hartwell." Nathan gestured to the woman beside him, and she smiled with perfect teeth and perfect composure and perfect timing. "She's carrying my son, my heir, the future of everything my family has built for 7 generations. I'm filing for divorce so that I can marry the mother of my child and give him the legitimacy he deserves." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Whispers became exclamations, became full conversations, as 300 guests tried to process what they were witnessing. Nathan's grandmother, Eugenia Reed, sat in her wheelchair at the family table with an expression of stone-faced approval, as if this public execution had been planned and sanctioned by the entire Reed dynasty. Nathan's parents flanked her like guards protecting a queen, their silence an endorsement more damning than any words. Gina felt herself moving before she made the conscious decision to move, her body operating on instinct while her mind tried to catch up with the magnitude of what had just happened. She walked through the crowd that parted for her like she was contagious, her heels clicking against marble floors that she had helped choose when they renovated this ballroom, past floral arrangements she had selected because Nathan once said he liked white roses mixed with greenery. She reached the podium and extended her hand. Nathan looked at her with confusion, then understanding, then something that might have been shame if he were capable of feeling it. He handed her the microphone, and Gina wrapped her fingers around it with enough force that her hand shook. "Thank you all for bearing witness tonight. Her voice came out steady despite the earthquake happening inside her ribcage. I've learned something valuable in my 15 years as a Reed. I've learned that some families measure worth by bloodlines instead of character. That some men are only as faithful as their options. That loyalty is conditional when legacy is involved. She turned to look at Vanessa Hartwell, really look at her, seeing the calculation behind the practiced sympathy in the woman's eyes. Congratulations on winning a prize that took me 15 years to build. I hope the foundation I laid is strong enough to support whatever comes next. I suspect you'll need every bit of it. Gina placed the microphone on the podium with deliberate care, then removed both wedding rings from her finger. The engagement ring had been Nathan's grandmother's, a family heirloom passed down through generations of Reed women who had all learned to swallow their disappointments with champagne and good breeding. The wedding band had been custom designed, engraved with words that meant nothing now. She set them both beside the 7-tier anniversary cake that she had designed herself, spending hours with the baker to get every detail perfect, not knowing she was creating a monument to her own destruction. Mrs. Reed, Eugenia's voice cut through the chaos like a blade finding flesh. You should have known better than to think you could keep a Reed man without giving him what every Reed woman has provided for 7 generations. This failure is yours to carry. Gina turned to face the wheelchair-bound matriarch who had never liked her, who had spent 15 years making clear that Gina was tolerated, but never truly accepted into the family. She walked to the old woman's table and leaned down until they were face to face, close enough that only Eugenia could hear her next words. I hope your heir brings you everything you deserve. Then she straightened, smoothed down her champagne gown one final time, and walked out of the Reed Estate ballroom with her head high and her heart in ruins. Behind her she heard the explosion of conversation, heard someone calling her name, heard the sound of her life ending while an orchestra continued playing because no one had thought to tell them to stop. She made it to her car before the shaking started, before her hands trembled so badly she could barely fit the key into the ignition. She drove away from the estate, away from the city where everyone knew her as Nathan Reed's wife. Away from everything she had built over 15 years of believing that love and partnership mattered more than biology. She didn't stop driving until her phone had 12 missed calls and the city lights were just aglow in her rearview mirror. The medical report in her purse felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She had picked it up from the clinic that morning, had read the results 3 times to make sure she understood them correctly, had spent the entire day deciding whether to tell Nathan before the party or wait until after. The decision had been made for her. Now she sat in a parking lot, outside a 24-hour diner, in a town whose name she didn't know, staring at paper that confirmed what her body had been telling her for weeks. She was pregnant, had been pregnant for weeks, long before Nathan started his affair with Vanessa Hartwell, long before he decided his wife was broken and inadequate. The baby growing inside her was the heir he claimed to want so desperately, the future he said she couldn't give him, the legacy he had just publicly declared she was incapable of providing. Gina pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. She thought about walking back into that ballroom and throwing the report at Nathan's feet, watching his face when he realized what he had done, forcing him to confront the magnitude of his mistake. She imagined the satisfaction of that moment, the vindication, the justice. Then she thought about her child growing up under the shadow of that moment, forever marked as the baby that came too late, the heir that only existed to prove a point. She thought about raising a son or daughter in the Reed family dynasty, surrounded by people who measured worth by bloodline and saw children as obligations rather than blessings. She thought about Eugenia's cold eyes and Nathan's casual cruelty and Vanessa's calculated smile. Gina made a decision that would echo through the rest of their lives. She would disappear. She would take her settlement money and her baby and her broken heart, and she would build a life somewhere Nathan Reed would never think to look. She would protect her child from ever knowing the father who had rejected them before knowing they existed. She would become someone new, someone stronger, someone who didn't need validation from people who had never truly valued her. The medical report went into her purse. The champagne gown would be donated to a thrift store in the morning. The name Gina Percy Reed would be erased from every document and directory and social media account she could control. By the time Nathan realized what he had lost, she would be gone so completely that even his money couldn't find her. She started the car and pulled back onto the highway, driving toward a future that terrified and liberated her in equal measure. Behind her, Nathan Reed was probably celebrating with his pregnant mistress, accepting congratulations from guests who thought they understood what they had witnessed. He had no idea that the wife he had publicly humiliated was carrying the exact thing he claimed she could never give him. And if Gina had anything to say about it, he would never know. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Morning came to the Reed estate like judgment, harsh and unforgiving, turning everything from romantic fairy tale to cold reality in the span of darkness to daylight. Nathan woke in Vanessa's penthouse apartment with a headache that pounded behind his eyes and a sensation in his chest that felt like drowning on dry land. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark, and when he picked it up he found it heavy with messages he didn't want to read. 200 calls, more texts than he could count, emails from people whose names he recognized, but whose concern felt hollow and performative. His assistant had sent 17 increasingly frantic messages about interview requests from gossip columns and society reporters. His lawyer had called 6 times, with the same message each time: "We need to talk about damage control." But there was nothing from Gina. No angry texts, no tearful voicemails, no demands for explanation or apology. Just silence, vast and complete, like she had simply ceased to exist the moment she walked out of the ballroom. Vanessa stirred beside him, her hand moving to rest on the curve of her belly, in a gesture he was learning she made constantly, always drawing attention to the life she carried, always reminding him of why they were together. She smiled at him with sleep-soft features and murmured something about breakfast, and Nathan felt a surge of resentment so sharp it shocked him. This wasn't how he had imagined his morning would feel. This wasn't the relief and rightness he expected after making such a definitive choice. The knock on the penthouse door came before he could process these unwelcome thoughts, sharp and authoritative, followed by his mother's voice, announcing that they were coming in whether Vanessa was decent or not. Nathan barely had time to pull on clothes before his entire family swept into the apartment like an invading army. His grandmother in her wheelchair pushed by a nurse. His parents dressed in formal clothes despite the early hour. His father's face set in lines that promised difficult conversations. They arranged themselves in Vanessa's living room with the precision of people staging an intervention, and Nathan found himself sitting across from his grandmother, while his mother perched on the arm of his father's chair, and Vanessa retreated to the kitchen with murmured excuses about making coffee that nobody wanted. "That was quite a performance last night," Eugenia began, her voice carrying the particular tone she used when she was about to deliver criticism disguised as observation. "The entire state is talking about it. The Reed name is in every gossip column and society page from here to the coast." Nathan waited for the rebuke, for the lecture about discretion and family reputation and keeping private matters private. Instead, his grandmother smiled, thin and satisfied. "Well done!" The words hung in the air like something obscene. Nathan stared at the woman who had raised him after his own mother proved too fragile for the demands of Reed family life, trying to understand how public humiliation of his wife of 15 years could possibly merit approval. The family was concerned you would remain trapped in an unproductive marriage out of misplaced loyalty, his father added, pulling out folders from his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Your grandmother and I discussed this situation extensively. A Reed man needs an heir. Your wife couldn't provide one. Vanessa can. The mathematics was simple. His mother reached across and opened the first folder, revealing legal documents dense with clauses and conditions. We've prepared dissolution papers. Our lawyers have crafted a settlement that's more than generous given the circumstances. The city house, half of your liquid assets, a trust fund that will keep her comfortable indefinitely. She'll sign because she has no other option. Nathan found himself looking at papers that would end his marriage, formal and final, reducing 15 years to line items and monetary values. The settlement was indeed generous by any objective standard, probably more than Gina would get if she fought him in court. His family had clearly been planning this for longer than he realized, preparing documentation and exit strategies while he was still pretending his marriage might survive. "What about Vanessa?" he heard himself ask, and his grandmother's smile widened. "Already handled. We've had her thoroughly vetted. Her family background is acceptable, her medical history clean, her pregnancy confirmed by 3 separate physicians we trust. The child is definitely yours. The due date aligns with when you began your relationship, and she's signed agreements that protect our interests while ensuring she's taken care of." His father slid another folder across the coffee table, this one containing financial arrangements that made Nathan's stomach turn. Vanessa would receive a substantial allowance, a trust fund for the baby, property, investments. But woven through every clause were protections for the Reed family, guarantees that she couldn't leave with their heir or demand more than what was agreed upon, consequences for any behavior that might damage the family reputation. "She's been remarkably cooperative," his mother added, "very understanding about the realities of marrying into a family like ours. The prenuptial agreement is already prepared for your signature." Nathan felt like he was watching this conversation from outside his body, observing a stranger who looked like him, but was making decisions without his input. When had all this been arranged? While he was working late, believing he was building towards something? While he was with Vanessa, thinking he was choosing his own path? How many of his choices had actually been his choices, and how many had been carefully orchestrated by people who had spent generations maintaining power through strategic breeding? "What if I don't sign?" he asked, and the room went very still. Eugenia leaned forward in her wheelchair, fixing him with eyes that had watched empires rise and fall, that had outlasted 2 husbands and countless rivals. "Then you'll lose everything. The company, the trust funds, the family name. Your father and I control the voting shares, and we'll remove you from every position you hold. You'll be wealthy enough to survive, but you'll never work in any industry we touch, and we touch everything that matters. More importantly, you'll lose your son. Vanessa has already agreed to marry you, but that agreement is conditional on family support. Without us, she has no reason to tie herself to a disgraced Reed." The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, as if discussing stock portfolios rather than destroying her grandson's entire existence. Nathan understood in that moment that this had never been about his happiness or even about producing an heir. This was about control, about ensuring that Reed family power continued exactly as it had for generations, with individual desires subordinated to collective legacy. He signed the papers because he couldn't see another path forward, because the weight of family expectation was crushing, because part of him still believed that becoming a father would fill the hollow place inside him that had been growing for years. His hand moved across page after page, his signature becoming more automatic with each document, until he had legally ended his marriage and legally bound himself to a woman he barely knew. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen after his family left, carrying coffee he didn't want. She sat beside him and took his hand, and when she spoke, her voice had a quality he hadn't noticed before, something calculated beneath the warmth. "I know this is hard, but we're going to build something beautiful together. You'll see. Once the baby comes, everything will make sense." Nathan looked at this woman who would become his wife, who would give him the heir his family demanded, who had agreed to terms and conditions before she agreed to love him. He wondered if she knew about the documents his family had prepared, if she had been part of the planning, if her pregnancy had been as accidental as she claimed. But he pushed those thoughts away because acknowledging them would mean confronting how thoroughly he had been manipulated by everyone around him. The society pages the next morning were brutal and gleeful in equal measure. Photographs of Vanessa glowing beside Nathan, while Gina walked away in the background. Headlines speculating about how long the affair had been happening. Columns debating whether a man had the right to leave a barren wife. The comment sections exploded with opinions, most of them vicious toward Gina, calling her selfish for not stepping aside sooner if she knew she was inadequate. Nathan found himself defending his ex-wife to his mother over breakfast, insisting that Gina had tried everything, that the inability to conceive wasn't her fault, that she deserved compassion rather than public shaming. His mother looked at him with something like pity and said that Nathan had always been too soft, too sentimental, too willing to put feelings before necessity. She reminded him that Reed men were taught from birth to make difficult choices, and that his grandfather would have been proud of him for finally doing what needed to be done. He tried calling Gina that afternoon, wanting to apologize for how public everything had become, wanting to explain that he hadn't meant for it to be quite so humiliating. But her phone went straight to voicemail, the generic message offering no comfort or connection. He called 17 more times over the following days, sent texts that went undelivered, even drove to the house he had given her in the settlement, only to find it empty, furniture covered with sheets. No sign that anyone had been there since she left. His lawyer reported that the settlement papers had been signed remotely and returned through an attorney Gina had hired, someone from out of state, who refused to disclose where their client was currently residing. The house sold within a week to an overseas buyer who paid cash and asked no questions. Her phone number was disconnected. Her email addresses bounced back with error messages. Her social media accounts vanished as if they had never existed. Gina Percy disappeared with a thoroughness that suggested professional help, and Nathan was left sitting in Vanessa's penthouse reading articles about his failed marriage, while his pregnant mistress planned their wedding and his family celebrated their victory. He told himself this was the right choice, the necessary choice, the choice that honored 7 generations of Reed family legacy. He told himself that fatherhood would give his life meaning in ways marriage never had. But late at night, when Vanessa was asleep and the penthouse was quiet, Nathan would find himself thinking about his ex-wife, about the way she used to wait up for him when he worked late, always with something warm to drink and questions about his day, about how she had believed in him before he had any reason to believe in himself, how she had turned their early poverty into adventure rather than hardship, about the 15 years she had given him, the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had set aside to help him build the life his family expected. He wondered where she was now, if she was crying or angry or relieved to be free of him. He wondered if she would find someone else, someone who would appreciate what he had been too blind to value. He wondered if she would ever forgive him. Not that forgiveness mattered when she had made it clear she wanted nothing more to do with him. What he didn't wonder, what never even crossed his mind, was whether Gina had been telling the truth all those years when she said she wanted children as much as he did. Whether the problem hadn't been her body, but timing and stress and the pressure of trying to conceive under the scrutiny of a family that measured worth by reproductive success. Whether she might have been pregnant when he decided she was broken beyond repair. Nathan Reed went to sleep that night with Vanessa beside him, feeling like he had won some great victory while losing something he couldn't quite name. Somewhere out in the darkness, Gina was beginning a new life with secrets that would reshape everything if he ever discovered them. But discovery would require searching, and Nathan had convinced himself there was nothing left to find. Chapter 3. The Birth. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and flowers. An overwhelming combination that made Nathan's head ache. Vanessa lay in the bed surrounded by enough floral arrangements to stock a funeral home, her face flushed with exertion and triumph, and in Nathan's arms was the smallest human being he had ever held. The baby boy was perfect in that way, that all newborns are perfect, with tiny fingers that gripped Nathan's thumb, and dark hair that stuck up at odd angles, and eyes that hadn't yet decided what color they wanted to be. Harrison Eugenia Reed, named for his great-grandfather and great-grandmother, blessed by the Reed family before he had taken his first breath outside the womb. Nathan stared at this child who was supposed to be his future, his legacy, his justification for every choice he had made, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Love, immediate and terrifying and absolute, flooded through him with enough force to make his hands shake. "He's beautiful," his mother breathed, leaning over Nathan's shoulder to examine her grandson. "He has your father's nose. And my eyes, I think." "Yes, definitely my eyes." Eugenia wept from her wheelchair, actual tears streaming down her weathered face, the first emotion Nathan had seen from her since his grandfather died. She reached out with trembling hands to touch Harrison's cheek, and when she spoke, her voice cracked with feeling. 7 generations. 7 generations of Reed men, and now an 8th. "You've given us everything, Nathan, everything." The room filled with champagne and congratulations, with relatives Nathan saw only at weddings and funerals, emerging to admire the heir, with business associates stopping by to pay respects and make connections with the future of the Reed dynasty. Someone took photographs, dozens of them, and Nathan realized later that Vanessa was barely visible in most of the shots. It was all the baby, all Harrison, all the culmination of months of planning and sacrifice and upheaval. They brought Harrison home to the estate after a few days, and Nathan's mother had transformed the nursery into something from a design magazine. Navy and cream colors, hand-painted murals of ships and sailing scenes, antique toys displayed on shelves like museum pieces. Vanessa stood in the doorway, looking at the room with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read, something that might have been satisfaction or might have been calculation. "It's perfect," she said, but she didn't move to place Harrison in the elaborate crib, didn't show any particular interest in the carefully curated space. "Your mother has excellent taste." Over the following days, Nathan noticed that Vanessa seemed strangely detached from their son. She would feed him when necessary, change him when required, hold him when guests were present. But there was no tenderness in the gestures, no natural maternal instinct that Nathan had assumed would emerge after birth. When Harrison cried, she would hand him to Nathan or to one of the nurses his mother had hired, always with excuses about being tired or overwhelmed or needing a moment to herself. Nathan told himself this was normal, that Vanessa was adjusting to motherhood, that some women needed more time to bond with their babies than others. He threw himself into fatherhood with devotion that surprised everyone, including himself. He learned how to change diapers and warm bottles and interpret different types of cries. He spent hours in the nursery holding Harrison, talking to him about nothing and everything, making promises about the future they would build together. The christening party was larger than his wedding had been, with half the state's elite attending to witness Harrison Eugenia Reed being officially welcomed into the family and into the church. Nathan stood at the altar holding his son, feeling the weight of 7 generations of Reed men pressing down on his shoulders, understanding for the first time what his family meant when they talked about legacy. This wasn't just a baby. This was the future of everything his grandfather had built, everything his father had maintained, everything Nathan was responsible for continuing. His grandmother gave a speech that brought many guests to tears, talking about her late husband and how proud he would have been to see another Reed boy carrying on the family name. She spoke about duty and sacrifice and the importance of making choices that honored the past while building the future. Several people glanced at Nathan during this speech, their expressions suggesting they understood she was talking about more than just general family values. Vanessa stood beside, Nathan looking radiant in designer clothes that his mother had purchased for the occasion, playing the role of devoted mother with practiced perfection. She smiled for photographs, accepted congratulations gracefully, held Harrison when appropriate, and handed him off when convenient. To anyone watching, they looked like the ideal family, the perfect continuation of the Reed dynasty. That night, after the guests had left and the estate had returned to quiet, Nathan sat alone in the nursery watching Harrison sleep. The baby lay in his elaborate crib, surrounded by navy and cream luxury, completely unaware of the expectations already being placed on his tiny shoulders. Nathan wondered if this was how his own father had felt, looking at a newborn son and seeing not a person but a responsibility, not a child but a dynasty. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Gina's number, still saved in his contacts, even though it had been disconnected for months. His thumb hovered over the call button, and he almost pressed it before Vanessa appeared in the nursery doorway asking if he was coming to bed. He put the phone away and told himself that whatever guilt he felt about his ex-wife was just exhaustion and adjustment, that it would fade once he settled into his new life. Harrison developed a fever during the night, sudden and high enough to terrify Nathan into immediate action. They rushed back to the hospital, and Nathan held his son while doctors examined him, while nurses drew blood, while machines beeped and monitors displayed numbers Nathan didn't understand. Vanessa stayed in the waiting room, claiming she couldn't bear to watch Harrison being poked with needles, and Nathan found himself alone with their son during the worst moments. The pediatrician ordered routine blood work to check for infections, and Nathan signed consent forms without reading them because all he cared about was making sure Harrison would be all right. The test showed a virus, nothing serious, something that would resolve with fluids and rest. They brought Harrison home after a few days, and Nathan barely slept, checking on the baby every hour to make sure he was still breathing, still fever-free, still alive. The call from the hospital came on a Tuesday afternoon, almost a week after Harrison's fever had broken. The genetic counselor's office requested a meeting with both Nathan and Vanessa to discuss some unexpected findings from the blood work. The secretary was very clear that both parents needed to be present, that this was a matter requiring immediate attention, that the conversation needed to happen in person rather than over the phone. Nathan assumed it was about some hereditary condition in his family, maybe something with the heart that ran through his father's line, or the arthritis that plagued his grandmother. He told Vanessa about the appointment while feeding Harrison a bottle, and she went very still, her face losing color in a way that should have warned him. They probably found nothing important, she said, her voice too careful, too controlled. Genetic counselors always want to discuss things in person, even when it's minor. Nathan agreed because he had no reason to suspect otherwise, no reason to think that a routine blood test would reveal anything except standard medical information. He scheduled the appointment for that afternoon, arranged for his mother to watch Harrison, drove to the hospital with Vanessa silent beside him in the passenger seat. The genetic counselor was a woman with sympathetic eyes and careful hands. The kind of person trained to deliver bad news gently. She invited them to sit, offered water they didn't want, opened a file that looked far too thick for a simple consultation. When she spoke, her voice was professionally neutral, designed not to convey judgment or opinion. During the routine blood work for Harrison's illness, our lab noticed something unusual about his blood type. We ran additional tests to confirm, and the results are definitive. She slid papers across the desk, charts filled with information Nathan didn't understand, columns of letters and numbers that meant nothing to him. Mr. Reed, based on your blood type and the baby's blood type, it's genetically impossible for you to be Harrison's biological father. The words landed like explosives in a space too small to contain their blast. Nathan read the papers once, twice, 3 times, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Terms like paternity exclusion and genetic impossibility swam across the page, all of them pointing to one inescapable conclusion. Harrison wasn't his son. He turned to look at Vanessa, expecting shock or confusion or denial, expecting her to be as blindsided as he was by this revelation. Instead, he saw something far worse. She was crying, yes, but underneath the tears was calculation, a rapid weighing of options, a decision being made in real time about how to handle this exposure. "Nathan, I can explain," she started, and he felt his entire world tilt sideways. The genetic counselor excused herself with murmured words about privacy, leaving them alone in an office that suddenly felt airless. Vanessa reached for Nathan's hand, but he jerked away, unable to bear the thought of her touching him, while his brain tried to process the magnitude of what he had just learned. "I was seeing someone else when we first got together." Vanessa's words came fast, rehearsed, like she had been preparing this confession for months. "I didn't know I was pregnant until after we'd already started our affair. I made a choice, Nathan. I looked at you and I looked at him, and I chose you. I chose your family, your life, your future. And I needed you to believe the baby was yours, because I knew you wanted a child so desperately." Nathan stood up so fast, his chair fell backward, the crash loud in the small space. "You lied. You've been lying for months. You let me end my marriage. You let me humiliate my wife in front of hundreds of people. You let me believe I was going to be a father when you knew the baby wasn't mine. But you are his father," Vanessa insisted, standing to face him. "Biology doesn't matter. You're the one who feeds him and changes him and holds him when he cries. The other man doesn't know, doesn't care, isn't in the picture at all. Harrison is yours in every way that matters." The fury that rose in Nathan was unlike anything he had ever experienced, white-hot and consuming, threatening to turn him into someone he didn't recognize. He thought about the anniversary party, about Gina walking out of that ballroom with her dignity intact while he stood beside a liar. He thought about signing divorce papers and dissolution agreements and trusts and settlements, all based on a fiction. He thought about his grandmother weeping over a great-grandson who wasn't actually part of their bloodline, about the christening party where they celebrated a Reed heir who carried no Reed blood. He left the hospital without another word to Vanessa, got in his car, and drove, not knowing where he was going until he ended up at his lawyer's office demanding every document related to his relationship with Vanessa Hartwell. What he discovered over the next hours made him physically ill. Vanessa had her own lawyer from the beginning, someone who had negotiated terms that guaranteed her millions, regardless of circumstances. She had structured agreements that protected her financially, even if the relationship failed, that ensured she couldn't be abandoned without compensation, even if the baby turned out not to be Nathan's. She had planned for this contingency, prepared for this exact scenario, set up safety nets before she ever announced her pregnancy. "She's been very thorough," Nathan's lawyer said grimly. "Fighting these agreements will be expensive and public. She could drag your name through every gossip column in the state. More importantly, she has evidence of your affair starting before you filed for divorce. Text messages, photographs, emails. She could paint you as an adulterer who abandoned his pregnant mistress when things got complicated." Nathan drove back to the estate as the sun was setting, his hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. He found Vanessa in the nursery, holding Harrison and singing softly, the picture of maternal devotion. She looked up when he entered, and her expression shifted from tender to defensive in an instant. "If you try to leave me, I'll destroy you," she said calmly, still holding the baby. "I'll go to every newspaper, every gossip column, every social media platform. I'll tell them you seduced me while married, promised me everything, then tried to abandon me when the baby came. I have proof of our affair, Nathan. Proof that you were cheating on your wife months before you filed for divorce. The Reed family name will be dragged through mud so deep it'll take generations to clean it off." Nathan stared at this woman who had trapped him with precision and forethought, who had played him like an instrument from the very beginning. Why? If you were pregnant by someone else, why choose me? Why go through all this? Vanessa smiled, and it was the coldest thing Nathan had ever seen. Because you're rich, you're desperate, and you're controllable. Your family is so obsessed with legacy that they didn't ask basic questions. You wanted a child so badly that you believed what you wanted to believe. And now you're stuck, because leaving costs too much, and staying costs your pride. I'd suggest you learn to live with it. She placed Harrison back in his crib with gentle hands that belied the cruelty of her words, then walked past Nathan and out of the nursery like she owned the estate. Nathan stood alone with a baby who wasn't his son, in a house that wasn't really his home, trapped in a life built entirely on lies. He thought about Gina then, truly thought about her for the first time in months, and wondered if she had known, if she had suspected something was wrong. If she had left, not just because he humiliated her, but because she saw through Vanessa's deception in ways he had been too blind to recognize. He pulled out his phone and called her disconnected number, listening to the automated message while holding a baby who represented the destruction of everything he thought he knew about his life. Chapter 4. The Truth. Nathan spent weeks trying to locate Gina through every resource available to someone who still had wealth even if his reputation was crumbling, and discovered that his ex-wife had erased herself with expertise that suggested she had help from people who understood how to disappear completely. The house he gave her in the settlement sold to buyers who knew nothing about the previous owner and cared less. Her accounts were closed, her mail forwarded to addresses that led nowhere, her entire digital existence scrubbed clean as if she had never been real at all. He hired investigators who came back empty-handed, frustrated by dead ends and careful planning. One of them admitted grudgingly that whoever helped Gina disappear knew exactly what they were doing, that this level of thoroughness required either professional assistance or extremely detailed planning. Nathan sat in hotel rooms reading reports that told him nothing useful, staring at the last photograph he had of his ex-wife, taken at a charity event, where she smiled at the camera while his hand rested on her lower back like he owned her. The Reed estate became intolerable. Vanessa settled into the master bedroom and began redecorating with his mother's enthusiastic approval, erasing every trace of Gina's 15 years until the house felt foreign to Nathan. His grandmother insisted on maintaining the fiction that Harrison was a Reed heir, refusing to acknowledge the paternity test results even in private. She claimed that bloodlines mattered less than raising the boy properly, that admitting the truth would damage the family reputation beyond repair, that sometimes lies were necessary for the greater good. His parents fell into line because disagreeing with Eugenia was unthinkable after a lifetime of submission. They cooed over Harrison at family dinners, posed for photographs that would appear in society columns, spoke about the future of the Reed dynasty as if genetic testing had never happened. Nathan watched his family swallow a massive lie and present it as truth, and understood finally what his grandmother had meant all those years when she talked about sacrifice for the family name. The betrayal compounded daily. Business partners who congratulated him on fatherhood now avoided his calls when rumors about the paternity test leaked through channels Nathan couldn't control. Society columns that once praised his dedication to family legacy ran blind items about Reed family secrets and questionable parentage. Investors who built fortunes alongside his grandfather suddenly developed concerns about Nathan's judgment, about his ability to lead, about whether the Reed name still carried the weight it once did. Nathan lost contracts, lost board positions, lost the respect of men who had known him since childhood. His company stock dropped enough that financial analysts started writing concern pieces about leadership stability. Everything he had built professionally began crumbling because he couldn't even verify basic facts about his own child. Because he had been so desperate for an heir that he believed what he wanted to believe instead of asking obvious questions. But worse than business losses, worse than social humiliation, worse than watching Vanessa redecorate his house and his grandmother rewrite reality to protect family, reputation, worse than all of it combined, was the growing realization that he had destroyed something irreplaceable for absolutely nothing. He thought about Gina constantly now, memories surfacing with painful clarity at unexpected moments. The way she used to organize his clothes by occasion, because she knew he got overwhelmed, choosing outfits for important meetings. The way she turned their tiny first apartment into something warm and welcoming, with creativity and almost no money. The way she held him when his father had a heart attack, steady and sure when everything else was chaos. He remembered her negotiating his first major contract because he was too inexperienced to recognize predatory terms, saving him from agreements that would have bankrupted him before he started. He remembered her at family gatherings, navigating his grandmother's cutting remarks and his mother's passive aggression with grace that made it look effortless. He remembered 15 years of a woman who loved him before he was anyone worth loving, who gave him her 20s and her ambition and her entire heart, asking only for fidelity in return, and he had thrown her away. Thrown away 15 years of partnership and support and genuine love for a lie, wrapped in the promise of something he already had, but was too blind to see. The realization came gradually. Then all at once, on a night when Nathan was searching through old emails, looking for something unrelated, and found messages from Gina to a doctor about fertility treatments. She had been trying, had scheduled appointments, had taken medications that made her sick, all while pretending everything was fine because she didn't want him to feel guilty or pressured. She had carried the burden of their childlessness alone, protecting him from the pain of it. And he had repaid her devotion by calling her broken in front of everyone they knew. Nathan sat in his hotel room, staring at email after email, documenting her quiet suffering, and something inside him simply shattered. He called her disconnected number and left a voicemail even though he knew it wouldn't be delivered. Just talked into the void about how sorry he was, how he understood now what he had done, how he would give anything to undo the anniversary party. His lawyer called the next morning with information that made Nathan's hands shake while reading. They found a paper trail, charitable donations from one of Gina's trust accounts to a children's hospital in a mountain town. The donations were recent, ongoing, substantial enough to suggest she had established herself in the area. The lawyer hesitated before sharing the final detail, then said the donations were made in honor of someone named Reed, first name only. No other information. Nathan heard those words and felt the earth shift beneath him. Reed. She was honoring someone named Reed with charitable donations to a children's hospital. The timing aligned perfectly. She disappeared shortly after the anniversary party, established herself in this mountain town, started making donations to a pediatric facility. If she had been pregnant when he humiliated her, if she had carried his actual child while he paraded another woman's baby as his heir, if the son or daughter he wanted so desperately was living 8 hours away while he raised a baby that wasn't his. The math was simple and devastating. If Gina conceived in the months before the anniversary party, she would have given birth in the months after her disappearance. The child would be young now, preschool age perhaps, living in a town Nathan had never heard of with a mother who had every reason to keep him away. The donations in honor of someone named Reed could be memorial, or could be celebration, or could be acknowledgement of a child who bore the family name despite having no connection to the family itself. Nathan made a decision his lawyer called inadvisable and his family would call reckless. He was going to that mountain town, and he was going to find his ex-wife, and he was going to discover whether the heir his family wanted so desperately was already born and hidden away where they could never touch him. He told no one where he was going. Packed a bag, left a note for Vanessa saying he needed time away, ignored his mother's calls, asking when he would return. He drove 8 hours through mountains that grew progressively steeper, following directions to a town called Stillwater Ridge that appeared on maps but barely qualified as more than a few buildings and a community center. The place was small enough that his expensive car drew immediate attention. Population sparse enough that everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. He checked into the only accommodation available, a bed and breakfast run by a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself as Delilah Moss and didn't ask questions but watched him like she already knew answers. Nathan spent his first day learning the town's layout, noting the single main street with its grocery store and diner and bookshop and community center that looked recently renovated. The children's hospital, where Gina made donations, was actually a family clinic with a modest pediatric wing, well-maintained but nothing like the facilities in the city. He ate lunch at the diner and asked casual questions about whether anyone knew a woman matching Gina's description, and the waitress told him kindly that Stillwater Ridge welcomed people who needed fresh starts, but respected privacy above all else. He was about to leave the diner when a group of children burst through the door, loud and laughing, followed by 2 women helping manage the chaos. One was elderly, moving slowly but with authority. The other was Gina. She wore jeans and a sweater, her hair longer than he remembered, her face makeup-free, and somehow more beautiful than when she dressed for society events. She was helping a small boy with a juice box, laughing at something he said, completely absorbed in the moment. Nathan stood up so fast he knocked over his water glass, and the crash made everyone turn toward him. Gina's eyes met his across the diner, and every sound seemed to stop. Her face went through rapid transformations, shock melting into fear, melting into anger, melting into something harder and more controlled. She said something to the elderly woman, who looked at Nathan with instant recognition and deeper dislike, then moved to physically block his path while Gina herded the children toward the back exit. Nathan tried to follow, but Delilah Moss stepped in front of him and suggested very firmly that he finish his lunch and think carefully about his next actions. Through the window, he watched Gina loading children into a van with help from the elderly woman, and then she was gone before he could reach her. He sat back down, shaking, understanding that finding Gina was only the beginning. Getting her to speak to him would be infinitely harder. The rest of the day proved his suspicion correct. The town collectively decided not to help him. The postal worker wouldn't confirm if Gina received mail there. The grocery clerk pretended ignorance about who he was describing. Even the community center director, friendly enough otherwise, said that resident privacy was sacred in Stillwater Ridge. Nathan was preparing to give up when he saw Gina again, walking toward the community center carrying art supplies. He intercepted her before she reached the door, calling her name, and she stopped but didn't turn around. When she finally faced him, her expression was carefully blank. Like he was a stranger, she was being polite to out of obligation rather than desire. He started to apologize, to explain, to beg for a chance to make things right. She cut him off with a voice that could have frozen fire. "You need to leave. You have no right to be here. I built this life to escape you, and I'm not letting you destroy it the way you destroyed everything else." He asked about Vanessa and Harrison, about the paternity test, about how everything was a lie. Her face didn't change, didn't show sympathy or satisfaction or any emotion at all. "I don't care what happened after I left. I don't care about your problems or your excuses or your regrets. You chose to believe a stranger over your wife. You chose to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered. You chose cruelty when you could have chosen faith." Then she said something that made his blood stop moving in his veins. "I did give you what you wanted. I could have destroyed you with that knowledge, but I chose mercy instead. I chose to disappear rather than force you to live with what you threw away." Nathan didn't understand, begged her to explain, asked what she meant about giving him what he wanted. Gina looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain and said that if he truly cared about her even a fraction of the amount he claimed, he would get in his car and drive away and never come back. She walked into the community center and locked the door behind her, and Nathan stood on the sidewalk, feeling like someone had reached into his chest and torn out something vital. He went back to the bed and breakfast and spent hours replaying her words, trying to decode what she meant about giving him what he wanted, about choosing mercy. Then understanding hit him like a physical blow in the dark hours before dawn. The donations made in honor of someone named Reed, the way she said she gave him what he wanted. The timing of her disappearance, the location of this town with its family clinic and its protective community. Nathan sat up in bed with his heart pounding, pulled out his phone, searched through emails and documents from the divorce. The anniversary party had been in spring. Vanessa gave birth in autumn. If Gina discovered her own pregnancy around the time Vanessa announced hers, if she was carrying his child when he paraded another woman's baby as his heir, if somewhere in this small town was a child who was actually his. He made it to the bathroom before he was sick, retching until nothing remained, gripping the sink while tears streamed down his face. If his math was correct, if his suspicion had any foundation in reality, then Gina had been pregnant at the anniversary party. She had stood in that ballroom listening to him call her broken while carrying the heir he claimed she could never give him. She had walked away, knowing she was protecting their child from the family that had rejected them both. And Nathan had spent the last several years raising another man's baby while his actual son or daughter grew up 8 hours away, hidden from him by a woman who had every reason to keep them apart. He had destroyed everything for a lie, and the truth had been growing inside his wife the entire time. Dawn came eventually, finding Nathan sitting on the bathroom floor with his back against the wall, understanding finally the full magnitude of what he had done. This wasn't just about ending a marriage or making a mistake or choosing wrong. This was about missing years of his child's life, about failing the two people who needed him most, about proving every terrible thing his family had taught him, about prioritizing legacy over love. He didn't know if Gina would ever tell him the truth. Didn't know if he had a son or daughter or any child at all. Didn't know if those donations were memorial or celebration or acknowledgement. But he knew he wasn't leaving Stillwater Ridge until he had answers, even if getting those answers meant facing truths he wasn't ready to accept. Chapter 5. The Search. Nathan spent 3 days observing Stillwater Ridge before he worked up the courage to approach Gina again, and in those 3 days, he discovered exactly how completely his ex-wife had woven herself into the fabric of this community. She taught art classes at the community center multiple times each week, her laughter echoing through hallways filled with children's paintings. She volunteered at the family clinic, helping coordinate patient care and organizing supply donations. She ran the town's food distribution program, ensuring families had what they needed without making anyone feel like charity was being given. The elderly woman from the diner was Florence Whitlock, who owned enough property in Stillwater Ridge to essentially control development, and who had clearly adopted Gina as something between a daughter and a protégé. Nathan watched them together through windows and from careful distances, saw how Florence protected Gina with fierce loyalty, how she positioned herself between Gina and anything that might cause harm. The children who burst into the diner that first day were part of an after-school program Gina had founded and funded herself, though she ran it like a community effort, so no one felt indebted. She had built a life here that mattered, a place where she was valued not for who she married, but for who she was. Nathan sat in his bed and breakfast room watching her move through town, and understood that she hadn't just left him. She had escaped to something better, something real, something that fed her soul in ways their marriage never managed. He finally cornered her at the community center on an evening when she was alone, setting up for the next day's art class. She was hanging children's paintings on the walls, standing on a ladder, and she didn't look surprised when he walked in. She climbed down carefully, wiped her hands on her jeans, and waited for him to speak with an expression that gave nothing away. "Were you pregnant when I ended our marriage?" The question came out raw and desperate, all his careful planning abandoned in favor of just asking the thing he needed to know. Gina's face didn't change, but her silence was confirmation enough. Nathan felt his legs give out and sank into one of the small chairs meant for children, his head in his hands. "How far along?" "Be far enough that I'd already heard the heartbeat at my first appointment. Far enough that I was planning how to tell you. Not far enough that anyone could tell just by looking." She said it in the same tone she might use to discuss the weather, as if she was describing something that happened to someone else, as if the pain of it had been compressed into something manageable through sheer force of will. Nathan looked up at her and asked the question he was terrified to have answered. "Where is the baby now? Did you keep the pregnancy? Please tell me there's a child." Gina crossed her arms and told him that information wasn't his business, that he forfeited any rights to their child when he chose another woman's baby over the possibility of his own. She reminded him that he called her broken, told her she would never be a mother, humiliated her in front of everyone who mattered. She asked what he expected her to do, come running back to give him another chance after he had already made his choice so publicly and so cruelly. Nathan tried to explain about Vanessa, about how the baby wasn't his, about how everything had been a carefully constructed lie from the beginning. Gina's expression finally changed, shifted into something that might have been satisfaction or vindication. "I know. I hired an investigator months ago and discovered the truth about Vanessa's pregnancy timeline. I knew about the other man. I knew you were being deceived. I knew exactly what you were walking into, and I didn't warn you." The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He asked why. Why would she let him destroy himself when she knew the truth? Why would she watch him fall into a trap she could see coming? Gina's composure cracked, and the pain underneath was devastating enough to fill the entire room. "Because watching you believe those lies was the closest thing to justice I could imagine. After what you did to me, I wanted you to feel a fraction of the betrayal I felt. I wanted you to invest everything in that baby, to rebuild your identity around being a father, and then to have it ripped away the same way you ripped my life away." She admitted it was cruel and petty, and that she wasn't proud of it. But in those first months, when she was pregnant and alone and devastated, knowing that Nathan was living his own lie was the only thing that kept her from falling apart completely. Nathan understood then that he wasn't the only one changed by what happened. Gina had been transformed too, hardened in ways that made her almost unrecognizable from the woman who used to believe the best in everyone. "Can I meet my child? If there is a child, please, Gina, I'm begging you for just that much." Gina looked at him for a long time before speaking, and when she did, her voice was very quiet. She told him their son was named Caleb Reed Percy, that he knew nothing about his father except that he made choices that hurt people. She said Caleb was happy, well-adjusted, loved by an entire town that helped raise him when Nathan wasn't there to do it. She explained that introducing Nathan into Caleb's life would require explanations she wasn't willing to give, wounds she wasn't ready to reopen, complications that served no one's best interests. Nathan got on his knees right there in the community center, surrounded by children's art and educational posters, and begged his ex-wife to let him be part of their son's life. He promised he would do anything, follow any rules she set, accept any conditions she imposed. He said he would move to Stillwater Ridge permanently, get a job, become part of the community, earn his way back into their lives however long it took. "Moving here won't change what you did. It won't erase the anniversary party or the divorce or the years you spent building a life with another woman while I raised our son alone. Caleb doesn't need a father who shows up out of guilt. He needs stability and consistency, and protection from the kind of pain that comes from hoping someone will change. Nathan asked what he had to do to prove he had changed, and Gina's answer destroyed him completely. If you truly changed, if you truly understood the gravity of what you did, you would respect my decision and leave us alone. You would prioritize Caleb's well-being over your own need for redemption. You would recognize that some mistakes are too big to fix, and some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. She picked up her jacket, turned off the lights, and told him the community center was closing and he needed to leave. Nathan stood alone in the dark, surrounded by evidence of the life his ex-wife built without him, finally understanding the full scope of what he had destroyed. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost years with his son, lost first words and first steps and first everything. He had lost mornings and bedtimes and sick days and celebrations. He had lost the everyday mundane magic of watching a child grow, and he could never get those years back. The most devastating part was that Gina was right. If he truly loved them, if he truly wanted what was best for Caleb, the most loving thing he could do was walk away and let them have the peace they had built without him. A better man, a changed man, a man who had actually learned from his mistakes, would respect that boundary and leave them alone. Nathan Reed was not yet that man. But standing in that dark community center, he decided he would become him. He would stay in Stillwater Ridge and prove through actions, instead of words, that he was capable of change. He would earn the right to know his son, even if it took years, even if Gina never forgave him, even if all he ever got was the chance to watch Caleb from a distance and know he was happy. The next morning, Nathan went to the only construction company in town and asked for a job. The owner, Russell Penn, looked at his expensive clothes and soft hands and laughed outright. Nathan explained that he would do any work Penn was willing to assign, that he needed to stay in Stillwater Ridge and needed employment to do it, that he understood he had no experience but was willing to learn. Penn studied him for a long moment, then offered him the worst job available, hauling materials and cleaning job sites for barely enough money to cover rent and food. Nathan accepted without hesitation. Penn told him to show up at dawn the next morning and to bring gloves because his hands were going to blister before the first day ended. Nathan rented a small apartment above the bookshop owned by a man named Vincent Tallow, who charged him twice the normal rate because he knew Nathan could afford it and wanted to test whether this was genuine commitment or temporary fantasy. Nathan paid the inflated rent and moved his belongings into a space smaller than his closet at the Reed estate. That first week of construction work nearly broke him. His body ached in ways he didn't know were possible. His hands blistered, then bled, then calloused. He carried materials until his shoulders screamed, cleaned sites until his back refused to straighten, learned to take orders from men who made clear they had no respect for someone who used to have wealth and status. Russell Penn gave him the hardest tasks deliberately, testing whether Nathan would quit when the work got difficult. Nathan didn't quit. He showed up every morning at dawn and didn't leave until the work was done. He learned how to frame walls and install cabinets and fix roofs with his hands, instead of hiring someone else to do it. He became familiar with tools he had never touched before, with skills he had never needed in his old life. His entire body protested this new existence, but he didn't complain, and he didn't quit, and he didn't ask for special treatment. Gina ignored him completely for the first 2 months. She walked past him on the street without acknowledgement, didn't respond when he offered to help carry her supplies, treated him like he was invisible. The town followed her lead. The diner waitress served him but didn't smile. The grocery clerk answered his questions but didn't chat. Parents picked up their children from art class and looked right through him as if he didn't exist. But Nathan had learned patience in the wreckage of his old life, and he understood that he didn't deserve warmth or welcome. He was here to prove he could show up consistently for something that mattered, to demonstrate through sustained action that he was capable of the kind of commitment he failed to show Gina when she needed him most. He started fixing things around town without asking permission. The broken fence around the community center playground appeared repaired one Saturday morning, when Nathan simply showed up with tools and materials and got to work. Gina saw him from the window but didn't come out. He fixed the loose steps on Florence Whitlock's front porch after watching her nearly trip. And when she opened the door to demand what he thought he was doing, he simply said he noticed they were dangerous and wanted to help. She slammed the door in his face, but didn't ask him to stop. He volunteered to repaint the family clinic's waiting room, worked with the town's festival cleanup crew, helped young couples move furniture. He never drew attention to himself, never asked for recognition, just quietly made himself useful in ways that benefited the community. 3 months into his exile, he saw Caleb for the first time up close when the boy wandered over to watch Nathan repairing a park bench. Caleb was small but sturdy, with serious eyes and his mother's stubborn mouth, and he asked Nathan questions about the tools with focused curiosity that made Nathan's chest physically ache. Nathan answered carefully, showing him how the level worked and letting him hold the hammer, and they worked together in companionable silence until Gina's voice called Caleb back to art class. The boy waved goodbye and ran off, and Nathan sat on that half-repaired bench and cried for the first time since the anniversary party. He cried for everything he lost, for the childhood he was missing, for the little boy who should know him but didn't. He cried until he had nothing left, and then he went back to work because work was the only thing keeping him from drowning. More months passed. Russell Penn started giving him actual carpentry projects instead of just grunt work, told him grudgingly that he wasn't terrible with his hands for someone who spent his life behind a desk. Vincent Tallow lowered his rent to the normal rate and started leaving books on Nathan's doorstep with notes about which ones he thought Nathan would enjoy. The diner waitress, whose name was Loretta James, started bringing him coffee the way he liked it without him having to specify. Slowly, incrementally, the town began to accept that Nathan Reed wasn't leaving and that maybe his penance was genuine. But Gina still wouldn't speak to him beyond basic politeness. She nodded when they passed on the street, acknowledged his existence with bare minimum courtesy, but there was a wall between them built from years of pain and betrayal. Nathan respected it. He didn't push, didn't demand, didn't try to force conversations she wasn't ready to have. He just continued showing up day after day, proving through sustained action that he was becoming someone different. One evening after nearly a year in Stillwater Ridge, Nathan was walking back to his apartment when he saw Gina sitting on a bench outside the community center with her head in her hands, clearly upset. Every instinct screamed at him to go to her, but he had learned restraint, so he started to walk past. Then he heard her crying, quiet sobs she was trying to muffle, and he couldn't keep walking. He sat down on the other end of the bench, far enough away that he wasn't crowding her, close enough that she knew he was there if she needed him. They sat in silence for several minutes before Gina finally spoke through her tears. She told him that Caleb had asked about his father today, asked why he didn't have one when all his friends did, asked if there was something wrong with him that made his father not want to stay. I tried to explain that sometimes adults make choices that have nothing to do with their children, that Caleb is loved and wanted and perfect. But the question broke something open inside me that I thought I'd sealed shut years ago. Nathan listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said the only thing that mattered. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Whenever you're ready to tell Caleb the truth, I'll be waiting. What I did to you was unforgivable, but Caleb is innocent and deserves to know his father if you ever decide that's what's best. I'll follow your lead completely, accept any boundaries you set, do whatever serves his well-being, even if it means staying in the background forever. Gina looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time since he arrived in Stillwater Ridge, and something in her expression softened just slightly. Why did you stay? Why did you give up everything to work construction in a town that hates you? Nathan's answer was simple. Because this is where my family is. I already lost years by choosing wrong. I'm not losing another day. Gina didn't say anything else, just stood up and walked back into the community center. But the next morning, she stopped at the bench where Nathan was eating lunch and asked if he wanted to help repaint the art room over the weekend. It wasn't forgiveness. It was barely even acceptance. But it was the first crack in the wall, and Nathan held onto it like his life depended on it. Chapter 6. The Discovery. Nathan had been in Stillwater Ridge for over a year when the wildfire started, a disaster that would test everything he had built and force Gina to confront whether the man standing in front of her was truly different from the one who destroyed her marriage. The fire began in the mountains surrounding the town, driven by drought and wind into something monstrous that threatened to consume everything in its path. The evacuation order came at dawn, and the town mobilized with practiced efficiency of a community that had survived disasters before. Nathan worked alongside Russell Penn and the construction crew, boarding up buildings and moving essential supplies to the evacuation center. Gina was at the community center coordinating transportation of elderly residents and families with small children, moving with calm authority even though Nathan could see fear in her eyes. The smoke was thick enough to taste, ash falling like snow, and by midday the fire had jumped the firebreak and was heading straight for the edge of town. The evacuation order became mandatory, but Gina realized with horror that not all the children from her after-school program had been accounted for. 3 kids were missing, their parents already evacuated, assuming their children were on the first bus out. Gina discovered that the children went back to retrieve personal belongings and never made it to the meeting point. She told Florence Whitlock to finish loading the bus and took off running toward the residential area now directly in the fire's path. Nathan saw her go, understood immediately what she was doing, and followed without hesitation. He caught up to her 3 blocks from the community center, grabbed her arm, and demanded to know what she was thinking. She jerked away and told him that one of the kids was terrified of fire, that the others were too young to understand what was happening, that she wasn't leaving 3 children to die because adults made evacuation mistakes. Then we move faster if we split up. Tell me which houses to check. They separated, running through smoke that was getting thicker by the minute, calling names, checking hiding spots. Nathan found 2 of the children cowering in their basement, too scared to come out, even with the fire approaching. He had to physically carry them both, one under each arm, back toward the evacuation point. Gina found the 3rd child hiding in his treehouse, frozen with fear, the fire now visible over the roofline of his house. She climbed up, talked him down with a calmness she didn't feel, and they made it to the street, just as Nathan appeared with the other 2 children. The fire was less than 2 blocks away now, and they could hear trees exploding from the heat. They ran, Nathan carrying 1 child while pushing another ahead of him, Gina with the 3rd in her arms. They made it to the evacuation bus just as it was about to leave, the driver holding the doors open while screaming at them to hurry. They piled in, gasping and coughing, and the bus pulled away just as the fire reached the buildings they had been searching. The children cried against Gina and Nathan, and the other passengers stared at them with expressions that shifted from judgment to grudging respect. That night in the emergency shelter set up in the next town over, Gina found Nathan sitting outside watching the orange glow on the horizon where Stillwater Ridge was burning. She sat down beside him without speaking, and they watched together as firefighters battled to save their town. The silence between them was different now, not hostile or painful, but companionable in the way of people who had been through something terrible together and survived. "What you did today," Gina finally spoke, "running into a burning town to save children you don't even know. The old Nathan would never have done that. The man I married was good, but he was also protected by wealth and privilege in ways that made him fundamentally separate from other people's suffering. Nathan listened, afraid to speak and break whatever was happening. Gina continued, telling him that she had watched him for over a year, trying to prove he had changed, and she had resisted believing it because believing would mean risking getting hurt again. But she was tired of being afraid, tired of punishing him when he was clearly punishing himself more effectively than she ever could. Tired of denying Caleb the chance to know his father because she was too wounded to take the risk. When the evacuation order came, my first instinct was to find you, because some part of me knew you would help. That instinct terrifies me because it means I still trust you in ways I don't want to trust anyone. Nathan finally spoke, his voice rough from smoke and emotion. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it. I don't even know if I'm capable of being the man you and Caleb need. But I want to try. I want the chance to prove that the last year wasn't a performance, but a transformation. I want to be there for the everyday, boring parts of parenting, not just the dramatic rescues. Gina looked at him. This man who gave up an empire to work construction in a town that hated him, who ran into a wildfire without hesitation to save children who weren't his. Caleb's birthday's coming soon. If the town survives this fire, I'll tell our son the truth about who you are. I'll introduce you properly, explain the history in age-appropriate terms, and give you the chance to build a relationship with your child. She was clear about her conditions. Nathan would respect her authority as Caleb's primary parent, would follow her lead on all decisions regarding their son, would understand that being a father was a privilege he would have to earn every single day. Nathan agreed to everything without hesitation, and they shook hands like they were sealing a business deal because neither of them was ready yet for more intimate gestures. 3 days later, the fire was contained. Stillwater Ridge survived with damage to the outskirts, but the heart of the town intact. The community returned to find homes covered in ash but standing, and recovery efforts began immediately. Nathan worked 20-hour days, helping repair damaged structures, and Gina organized the community center as a distribution point for aid. On Caleb's birthday, Gina kept her promise. She brought their son to the park, where Nathan had been building a new playground structure, and she told Caleb that there was someone he needed to meet. Nathan watched them approach, his hands shaking, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. Gina sat down on a bench and pulled Caleb onto her lap, and in clear, simple terms, she told their son that Nathan was his father. She explained that they used to be married, that they made mistakes that hurt each other, but that Nathan had been living in Stillwater Ridge because he wanted to be part of Caleb's life. Caleb looked at Nathan with serious eyes and asked why he wasn't there before. Nathan knelt down so they were at eye level and told his son the truth, that he made terrible choices, that he hurt people, including Caleb's mother, and that he had spent the last year trying to become someone worthy of being called a father. I can't change the past, but I hope you'll give me a chance to be better in the future. Caleb thought about this, then asked if Nathan was the man who fixed his bike and helped him with his treehouse. Nathan said yes, and Caleb nodded as if this made sense. Then he asked if Nathan would teach him how to build things. Nathan's eyes filled with tears, and he promised that he would teach Caleb everything he knew. Gina watched them, this father and son having their first honest conversation, and felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever again in the way it was before, but it was possibility. It was the crack of light under a door she thought was locked forever, and for the first time in years, Gina allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, broken things could be rebuilt into something new. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. 2 years after Nathan first walked into the diner and saw Gina with their son, on the spring morning when the mountains were green and the town had fully recovered from the fire, Nathan received a letter that would force both of them to confront the final ghost of their past. The letter was from his family's lawyers, informing him that his grandmother Eugenia Reed had died and left him a substantial inheritance, along with a controlling stake in the family holdings. The will contained conditions. Nathan must return to manage affairs, must re-establish the Reed name in society, must fulfill obligations to the family legacy. If he refused, everything would go to distant relatives, who would dismantle what his grandfather had built. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and Nathan sat in his small apartment above the bookshop, holding this piece of paper that represented everything he walked away from. He could go back. He could reclaim his position, could rebuild the fortune he lost, could give Caleb every advantage of the Reed name and wealth. Or he could stay in Stillwater Ridge, where he had finally found purpose and peace, where he had a job he loved, and a son who was learning to trust him, and an ex-wife who sometimes smiled at him when they were co-parenting. He brought the letter to Gina that evening, after Caleb had gone to bed at her house, where Nathan now had standing permission to visit 3 nights a week for homework help and dinner. Gina read it carefully, then handed it back and asked what he was going to do. Nathan told her honestly that he didn't know. That part of him felt obligated to his family legacy, even after everything they put him through. But another part of him remembered what that life cost him the first time. "What do you think I should do?" Gina surprised him. She said that for 2 years she had watched him work construction and teach their son carpentry, and become a valuable member of this community. And in all that time, she had never once heard him mention missing his old life. She pointed out that when the Reed family name came up in conversation, he changed the subject, that when people asked about his past, he gave minimal answers. She suggested that maybe he wasn't actually torn about this decision, that maybe he was looking for permission to refuse the inheritance and choose the life he had built here. Nathan realized she was right. He didn't want to go back. He didn't want to manage holdings built on the kind of family dynamics that made his grandmother prioritize bloodlines over human decency. He didn't want Caleb growing up in that world, learning those values, becoming another generation of Reed men who measured worth by legacy instead of character. "I want this life, the small apartment and the construction work, and the community that sees me for who I am, not what I represent." Gina nodded as if she expected this answer. Then she said something that changed everything. "I've been offered a position in a larger city, running an arts program for underprivileged youth. It's a dream opportunity, exactly the kind of work I wanted to do before I married into the Reed family. But taking it would mean leaving Stillwater Ridge, and I've hesitated because I know you've built your life here." She was asking in her careful way if he would be willing to leave too. Nathan understood what she was really testing. If he was serious enough about co-parenting, about being present in Caleb's life, that he would uproot himself again to follow them. It was the final test to see if his commitment was real or only worked when circumstances were convenient. His answer was immediate. "Wherever Caleb is, that's where I need to be. If that means moving to a new city and starting over again, then that's what I'll do. I'll refuse the inheritance, find carpentry work there, build another life from scratch if that's what it takes." Gina looked at him for a long moment, tears in her eyes. "Watching you choose Caleb over the Reed fortune, choose our small family over an empire, this is the first time I've truly believed that you've changed." The old Nathan would have tried to negotiate, would have looked for a compromise that let him have both worlds. This Nathan just chose without hesitation. She reached across the table and took his hand, the first time she had voluntarily touched him in 2 years, and her hand was shaking. "I'm terrified of trusting you again, terrified of believing in us again, terrified that I'm setting myself up for another devastating heartbreak." "I'm terrified too," Nathan agreed. "Terrified I'll mess this up, that I'm not strong enough to be who you need." "Then we'll be scared together. And we'll figure it out, one day at a time." She told him that she didn't want to co-parent from separate houses anymore, didn't want scheduled dinner nights and drop-off logistics, didn't want Caleb growing up between two homes when they could be one family. She wasn't promising marriage, not promising they would go back to what they were, but she was willing to try building something new. She suggested they look for a house together in the new city, that they raise Caleb as partners even if they were sleeping in separate bedrooms, that they give themselves permission to see if the last 2 years of healing and growth could become something more. Nathan broke, just completely fell apart, pulling her into his arms and sobbing against her shoulder while she held him. He cried for everything they lost, for the years they spent apart, for all the damage he caused that could never be fully repaired. But he also cried with relief and gratitude and overwhelming love for this woman who had every reason to hate him, but was choosing forgiveness instead. Gina cried too, letting herself finally grieve the marriage that died and the possibility of something new being born from its ashes. They sat in her kitchen holding each other while Caleb slept upstairs, and it felt like both an ending and a beginning. The next morning they told Caleb together that they were moving to a new city, that Nathan was coming with them, that they were going to be a real family. Caleb asked if that meant Nathan would live with them all the time, and when they said yes, he whooped with joy and ran to his room to start packing immediately. Nathan and Gina laughed through their tears and started planning their future. Nathan contacted the lawyers and officially refused the Reed inheritance, signing documents that removed him from family holdings and trust funds. His parents called, his mother crying and begging him to reconsider, but Nathan was firm. He told them that they had a choice years ago when he brought another woman into their home and humiliated his wife. They could have stopped him, could have told him he was making a terrible mistake, could have chosen integrity over image. You didn't. You enabled my worst instincts because you cared more about appearances than truth. I'm done living my life according to Reed family values. His mother tried to tell him about Vanessa, about how she finally left after draining their resources for years. But Nathan didn't care. That chapter of his life was closed. 4 months later, Nathan stood in the kitchen of their new house in a city 3 hours from Stillwater Ridge, helping Caleb make breakfast while Gina slept in because it was Saturday and she had worked late on her program. Caleb chattered about his new school and his new friends, and Nathan listened while flipping pancakes, thinking about how this mundane morning was everything he almost threw away. Gina appeared in the doorway wearing one of Nathan's old shirts, her hair messy from sleep, and she smiled at them. Nathan's heart stopped because that smile was the one he remembered from years ago before everything went wrong, the smile she used to give him when she thought he wasn't looking. Chapter 8. The Staying. After breakfast, when Caleb went to his room to play, Nathan and Gina cleaned up together in comfortable silence. She washed, he dried, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When the last dish was put away, Gina turned to him and said very quietly that she needed to tell him something. Nathan's stomach dropped, terrified that she had changed her mind, that this was where she told him it wasn't working. Instead, she told him that last night while he was putting Caleb to bed. She sat in the living room, thinking about how her life had changed in the last 2 years. She thought about how angry she was when he first showed up in Stillwater Ridge, how betrayed she felt, how certain she was that she would never forgive him. She thought about watching him work construction and repair playground equipment and become someone completely different from the man who destroyed her. I thought about the wildfire, about you running into danger without hesitation, about the way you've shown up every single day for 2 years, without asking for anything in return. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting for you to disappoint me. She told Nathan that she wasn't in love with him the way she was before. That innocent, trusting love died at the anniversary party and couldn't be resurrected. But there was something else growing, something more mature and complicated, built on witnessing real change instead of believing in potential. Maybe this new love is better because it's based on who we actually are, instead of who we thought we were. I want to try, really try, not as co-parents sharing a house, but as partners trying to build a relationship. Nathan asked if she was sure, reminded her that he didn't deserve this, that he would understand if she needed more time. Gina cut him off and told him that she was done making decisions based on what he deserved. She was making this decision based on what she wanted, and what she wanted was to stop living in the past and start building a future with the man standing in front of her. Then she kissed him. It was tentative and careful, nothing like the passionate kisses from their early marriage, but it was real, and it was a beginning. When they pulled apart, Nathan was crying again, and Gina wiped his tears with her thumb and told him that he needed to stop crying so much because their son was starting to think that was how adults communicated. Nathan laughed through his tears and pulled her close, and they stood in their kitchen holding each other, while Caleb's laughter echoed from upstairs and sunlight streamed through the windows. Everything felt fragile and precious and possible in ways he hadn't believed anything could be possible after the wreckage of his first marriage. Over the following months, they built something new together, not a recreation of what they had before, but something different and in many ways stronger, because it was founded on truth instead of illusion. They learned each other again, not the people they were in their 20s when they first fell in love, but the people they had become through hardship and growth and painful transformation. Nathan discovered that Gina was funnier than he remembered, that surviving what he did to her had given her a sharp wit she wielded with precision. She discovered that Nathan was more thoughtful than he used to be, that losing everything had taught him to notice small moments and appreciate ordinary kindness. They disagreed about things, how to handle Caleb's occasional tantrums, whether to allow screen time before homework, what constituted appropriate bedtime, but they learned to navigate disagreement without it becoming warfare. Caleb thrived with both parents under one roof. He would run to Nathan with questions about building things, to Gina with questions about art and feelings, and to both of them when he just needed to be held. Nathan attended school conferences and helped with homework, and learned the names of Caleb's teachers and friends. Gina watched Nathan become the father she always hoped he would be, and slowly the fear that he would abandon them again began to fade. 6 months into their new life together, Nathan proposed properly, not with a grand gesture or an expensive ring, but with a simple question asked while they were watching Caleb at his school's winter concert. He leaned over and whispered that he knew they said they would take things slow, but he wanted her to know that he was committed for life, whether she wanted to remarry him or not. "If you're willing, I'd love to stand up in front of everyone who matters and promise again to love and honor you, but this time actually understanding what those words mean." Gina didn't answer immediately. She watched their son singing off-key on stage, this beautiful child who existed because of love and survived because of her strength. Then she turned to Nathan and told him that she would marry him on one condition, that they write their own vows, and that his vows include a promise to never stop choosing them, even when other options appear. Nathan agreed, and they told Caleb that night that they were getting married. Their son hugged them both and said he already knew that was going to happen, because Florence Whitlock told him that some people need to break completely before they figure out how to be whole. The wedding happened in Stillwater Ridge, in the community center where Nathan had spent 2 years proving himself. It was small and intimate, just close friends and the community that watched them heal. Gina wore a simple dress. Nathan wore a suit he bought at the local store, and Caleb stood between them during the ceremony. When it came time for vows, Nathan spoke directly to Gina. He promised to choose her every day, to never let pride or fear or family obligation come before their family. He promised to honor the woman she became when he broke her, to respect the strength it took to give him a second chance, to spend every remaining day earning the trust she was giving him. He promised to teach their son that being a man means showing up, means admitting mistakes, means doing the hard work of change. I promise to love you, not despite our history, but because of it. Because the journey we took to get here, as painful as it was, made us both better people. I promise to be worthy of you. Not because I think I can erase what I did, but because I understand now that love is a choice you make every single day, and I choose you. Today and every day after, Gina's vows were equally powerful. She promised to let go of the past, to stop waiting for him to become the man who hurt her. She promised to believe in who he was now instead of who he was then. She promised to be vulnerable again, to risk her heart again, to trust that this time the foundation they were building was strong enough to last. I promise to help you be the father you want to be to Caleb, to partner with you in raising our son with values of integrity and empathy and accountability. I promise that this marriage will be different because we're both different. We're not young idealists anymore, but people who've been broken and rebuilt. And sometimes broken things heal stronger than they were before. They kissed as husband and wife again, and the community cheered, and Caleb wrapped his arms around both their legs in a family hug. That night, lying in bed in the small hotel in Stillwater Ridge, Nathan and Gina talked about the future. They talked about maybe having another child, about whether Nathan should start his own carpentry business, about Caleb's upcoming birthday. They talked about ordinary things, because ordinary was the greatest gift after years of dramatic pain. Nathan fell asleep with Gina in his arms and their son in the next room, and he thought about how he lost an empire but gained everything that actually matters. Chapter 9. The Rebuilding. The first year of their remarriage was harder than either of them anticipated, not because they didn't love each other, but because love alone couldn't erase the scar tissue from their past. There were moments when Gina would hear Nathan's phone ring and freeze, old fears surging up before she could control them. There were nights when Nathan would wake up in a panic, dreaming about the anniversary party, about Gina walking away while he stood beside Vanessa. They fought sometimes, real fights that left them both exhausted and questioning whether they had made a mistake trying to rebuild what had been so completely destroyed. The worst fight happened on their anniversary, when Nathan tried to take Gina to an expensive restaurant and she broke down completely, sobbing that she couldn't celebrate their marriage in places that reminded her of their old life, of the world that had watched her public humiliation, every fancy restaurant, every expensive gesture, every attempt to recreate what we had before. It just reminds me that I'm not that woman anymore. I don't want to be that woman anymore. She was naive and trusting, and she got destroyed for it. Nathan held her while she cried and apologized for not understanding, for thinking that romantic gestures could paper over trauma. They canceled the reservation and spent their anniversary at home with Caleb, eating takeout and playing board games. And it was better than any expensive dinner could have been. They started seeing a counselor together, something Nathan initially resisted because read men didn't discuss feelings with strangers. But Gina insisted that if they were going to make this work, they needed help processing what happened, needed tools for navigating triggers and old wounds, needed a neutral space to discuss the things they couldn't discuss alone. The counselor taught them how to fight productively, how to express hurt without attacking, how to rebuild trust in incremental steps. Slowly, things got easier. Gina learned to voice her fears when they arose instead of letting them fester. Nathan learned to recognize when Gina was withdrawing and gently draw her back instead of giving her space that felt like abandonment. They established rituals that were theirs alone. Saturday morning pancakes that Nathan made with Caleb while Gina slept in. Sunday evening walks where they talked about the week without interruption. Wednesday night date nights that were non-negotiable, regardless of work or exhaustion. Caleb became the center of their world in the best possible way. They attended every school event together, coached his soccer team as a unit, helped him with science projects that inevitably became more complex than necessary, because Nathan couldn't resist turning everything into a learning opportunity. Watching Nathan with their son healed something in Gina that she hadn't known was still wounded. Seeing him patient with Caleb's fears, encouraging with Caleb's dreams, present in all the small moments, it proved that his transformation was real and lasting. Nathan's carpentry business grew through word of mouth, and he hired 2 apprentices from the community college who reminded him of himself when he first arrived in Stillwater Ridge, lost and trying to find purpose through honest work. Gina's arts program expanded to serve 3 neighboring communities, and she found herself mentoring young teachers who wanted to make a difference. They built lives that mattered, work that served others, identities separate from their marriage, but enhanced by their partnership. They talked about having another child, lengthy discussions about whether they were ready, whether it was fair to Caleb, whether they could handle the stress of a baby while still healing from their past. Gina admitted she was terrified of pregnancy after carrying Caleb alone, terrified that her body would remember the trauma of being pregnant while her marriage was imploding. Nathan admitted he was terrified of failing another child, of somehow repeating his mistakes despite his best intentions. In the end, they decided to wait. Maybe someday when they were stronger, when their marriage was more stable, when Caleb was older. But for now, being a family of 3 was enough. More than enough. It was everything they needed. They took Caleb back to Stillwater Ridge for summer vacation, and the town welcomed them like returning heroes. Florence Whitlock had aged considerably, but was still sharp as ever, and she pulled Nathan aside to tell him that she was proud of him for proving her initial assessment wrong. Russell Penn offered Nathan partnership in the construction company, and Vincent Tallow showed them the bookshop expansion he had built using techniques Nathan taught him. Sitting on the porch of Florence's house, watching Caleb play with other children in the yard, Gina leaned against Nathan's shoulder and said something she had been holding back for months. "I'm glad you found me in Stillwater Ridge. I didn't think I was glad at the time. I was furious and terrified and determined to keep you out of our lives. But watching Caleb with you, seeing the father you've become, knowing that he has both of us instead of just me, I'm glad." Nathan didn't respond with words, just wrapped his arm around her and held her close while they watched their son play. Some moments didn't need words. Some moments were perfect just as they were. On Caleb's birthday that summer, they threw a party that combined Stillwater Ridge friends with their new community friends. Children ran wild in the backyard. Adults talked and laughed, and Nathan stood at the grill making hamburgers while Gina organized party games with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for years. Watching her interact with other parents, laughing at jokes and coordinating activities, Nathan was struck by how different this was from their old life. No one here cared that they used to have money. No one knew about the Reed family or the scandal or the anniversary party disaster. To this community, they were just Nathan and Gina, 2 people who worked hard and loved their kid and showed up when others needed help. It was anonymous in the best possible way, liberating in ways Nathan hadn't understood he needed. That night, after all the guests had left and Caleb was asleep surrounded by new toys, Nathan and Gina collapsed on the couch together, exhausted but happy. Gina's head rested on Nathan's shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset through their living room window. "We're going to be okay," Gina said quietly. "I think we're actually going to be okay." Nathan kissed the top of her head and agreed. They were going to be more than okay. They were going to be happy, in the quiet, unspectacular way that actually mattered. No grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just 2 people who had been through hell and come out the other side holding on to each other. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect. There would still be hard days, still be moments when the past threatened to swallow them, still be times when they questioned everything. But they would face those moments together, as partners, as equals, As two people who understood that love wasn't about perfection, but about choosing each other even when choosing was hard. And that, Nathan realized, was more valuable than any empire his family could have offered him. Chapter 10. The Homecoming. They had been remarried for 3 years when Gina finally said the words Nathan had stopped hoping to hear. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening, nothing special or planned, just the two of them sitting on the back porch after putting Caleb to bed. The stars were bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance a dog was barking. Nathan was drinking coffee even though it was late, and Gina was wrapped in a blanket because spring evenings still carried winter's chill. "I forgive you." The words were so quiet, Nathan almost missed them. He turned to look at her, not sure he had heard correctly, not sure he was allowed to hope. Gina was staring straight ahead at the stars, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the blanket like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "I've been holding on to the anger for so long that it became part of who I am. I built my identity around being the woman you destroyed, the wife you humiliated, the mother who raised your son alone. But I'm tired, Nathan. I'm so tired of carrying that weight. And you've proven, God, you've proven over and over again that you're not that man anymore." Nathan couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except sit very still and let her words wash over him. Gina finally turned to look at him, her face wet with tears, but her expression peaceful in a way he hadn't seen since before their first marriage ended. "I forgive you for the anniversary party. I forgive you for choosing Vanessa over me. I forgive you for calling me broken when I was carrying our son. I forgive you for all of it, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. And I can't have peace while I'm still holding on to what you did to me all those years ago." Nathan reached for her hand, and she let him take it, their fingers intertwining in the darkness. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve it. I'll never deserve it. But thank you." They sat together in silence for a long time, both of them crying quietly, both of them feeling the weight of years of pain finally beginning to lift. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It didn't make the anniversary party any less devastating, or the years apart any less lost. But it meant they could finally stop living in the past and fully inhabit their present. That night, for the first time since they remarried, Gina initiated intimacy without hesitation or second-guessing. It was tender and careful and full of tears, both of them relearning each other's bodies, both of them acknowledging silently that this was different from before, because they were different. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Nathan whispered against her hair that he loved her more than he had ever loved anything in his life. "I know," Gina whispered back. "I finally believe it." The following months felt like a different marriage entirely. The tension that had lived beneath even their happiest moments finally dissipated, leaving room for something lighter and more joyful. They laughed more, touched more casually, made plans for the future without the shadow of the past threatening to destroy everything. Gina signed them up for a pottery class because she wanted to try something new, and they spent Saturday mornings covered in clay, making lopsided bowls and laughing at their lack of talent. Nathan surprised Gina with a trip to the coast, just the two of them for a long weekend, while Caleb stayed with Florence Whitlock, who had relocated to be closer to them. They walked on the beach, holding hands, ate at restaurants without checking prices, stayed in bed late talking about everything and nothing. It felt like a honeymoon, like they were falling in love again, but with the wisdom and scars that made the falling so much more meaningful. When they returned home, Caleb announced that he wanted a little brother or sister. Gina and Nathan exchanged glances across the dinner table, having this entire conversation in silence, the way long married couples can. They hadn't revisited the idea of another child since their first discussions, both of them focusing on healing their marriage before adding more complexity. But now, with forgiveness finally spoken and their relationship on solid ground, the idea didn't seem quite so terrifying. "We'll think about it," Gina told Caleb. and Nathan reached under the table to squeeze her hand. They did think about it. Long conversations late at night about whether they were ready, whether their marriage was strong enough, whether they could handle the exhaustion of a newborn. Gina admitted that part of her wanted to experience pregnancy with Nathan present and supportive, to reclaim that experience from the trauma of carrying Caleb alone. Nathan admitted that he wanted the chance to be there from the beginning, to not miss a single moment. 6 months later, Gina told Nathan she was pregnant. They cried together in their bathroom, holding the positive test, both of them terrified and thrilled in equal measure. This time, Nathan went to every appointment, held Gina's hand during every ultrasound, talked to her belly every night before they went to sleep. This time, when Gina felt sick or tired or overwhelmed, Nathan was there to support her instead of being absent or worse, betraying her. Caleb was ecstatic about becoming a big brother. He drew pictures of the baby, helped Nathan build a crib from scratch, talked constantly about teaching his sibling everything he knew. Watching their son prepare for this new addition, Gina felt her heart expand in ways she didn't know were possible. The baby arrived on a clear autumn morning. Her daughter they named Hope because that's what she represented. Hope that healing was real. Hope that second chances could work. Hope that families broken beyond recognition could be rebuilt into something beautiful. Nathan held his daughter for the first time and wept openly. This man who had learned to feel his emotions instead of suppressing them. This father who understood now what really mattered. Gina watched Nathan with their daughter and their son, watched him navigate fatherhood with patience and presence and genuine joy, and felt the last piece of her resentment finally dissolve. This was who he was always meant to be. It just took losing everything for him to find it. They brought Hope home to a house full of love and laughter and mundane chaos. Caleb was a devoted big brother, always wanting to help with feedings and diaper changes. Nathan juggled work and night feedings with barely a complaint. Gina recovered slowly, supported by a husband who actually understood that partnership meant carrying equal weight. One night, when Hope was a few months old, Nathan found Gina standing in the nursery, watching their daughter sleep. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together in the darkness, listening to the soft sounds of their baby breathing. "I never thought we'd get here," Gina whispered. "After the anniversary party, after everything that happened, I was sure my life was over. I thought I'd never trust anyone again, never love again, never have the family I always wanted." "But you did it anyway," Nathan said quietly. "You built a life for yourself and Caleb. You survived when you had every reason to give up. You're the strongest person I've ever known." Gina turned in his arms to face him, and in the dim light from the nightlight, she could see the man he had become. Gone was the arrogance and entitlement of the Nathan Reed who destroyed her. In its place was humility and gratitude and deep understanding of how precious second chances were. "We're going to be okay," she told him, echoing words she had spoken years before. "We're more than okay. We're happy," and they were. Not perfectly, not without struggles, not without moments that still challenged them. But they were happy in the way that mattered. The deep, sustainable happiness that comes from choosing each other every day. From building something real instead of performing something false. From understanding that love isn't about perfection, but about perseverance. Later that night, after Hope was fed and sleeping soundly, after Caleb was tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Nathan and Gina lay in their own bed, talking in the darkness like they used to do when they were young and newly married, and thought they had forever figured out. "Do you ever regret giving me another chance?" Nathan asked, voicing the fear that still occasionally woke him up at night. Gina was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully because Nathan deserved honesty, even when honesty was complicated. "I regret what you did to me. I regret the years we lost. I regret that Caleb's early childhood didn't include his father. I regret all of that, and I always will." Nathan started to apologize again, but Gina pressed her fingers against his lips to stop him. "But I don't regret choosing to forgive you. I don't regret letting you into Caleb's life. I don't regret building this family with you, because this version of us, the one that survived everything and came out stronger, this is real in ways we never were before." She took his hand and placed it over her heart so he could feel it beating. "The woman you married all those years ago was naive enough to think love meant never being hurt. The woman lying beside you now knows that love means being hurt and choosing to stay anyway. And I choose to stay, Nathan. Every single day I choose us." Nathan pulled her close and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. She was everything. She was forgiveness and grace and second chances made flesh. She was proof that broken things could heal and that people could change, and that sometimes the stories that seem like tragedies could transform into something beautiful if you were willing to do the work. Outside their window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama and human healing, constant and eternal. Inside the house, a family slept, imperfect and hard-won and absolutely real. A father who had learned what truly mattered. A mother who had learned to trust again. Two children who would grow up knowing that love means showing up, means choosing, means doing the difficult work of being human together. It wasn't the ending Nathan would have written when he stood in that ballroom all those years ago, destroying his marriage in front of everyone who mattered. It was better. It was real. It was earned through pain and patience and persistent effort to become someone worthy of the love being offered. And as Nathan drifted off to sleep holding his wife while his children slept safely down the hall, he understood finally that this was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive parties or public declarations. Just ordinary moments strung together into a life that mattered, shared with people who chose to stay, even when leaving would have been easier. This was home. This was family. This was everything he had been searching for, finally found in the ruins of everything he thought he wanted.